Josie Taylor reporting. It's set to be a crucial week in the Senate, one that could decide whether or not the Turnbull government has the option of going to an early double dissolution election. It wants to see the Senate this week vote on legislation to reform the way senators are elected, making it harder for micro-parties to win a spot. Understandably, that doesn't have the support of most of the crossbenchers who wouldn't be re-elected if it passes. But if it doesn't get through, then there's no real point to the government going to a double dissolution, as it could get the same sort of Senate makeup again. One of the crossbench MPs, Ricky Muir, is hoping to delay the Senate reform debate by instead bringing on a discussion about legislation to re-establish the construction industry watchdog, the ABCC. But the Senate only has 3 days to sit this week, and it might not be possible for both bills to get a hearing. With me live from Canberra are three crossbench senators, independents Nick Xenophon and Jackie Lambie, and Liberal Democratic Party Senator David Leyonhjelm. Thank you to all of you for being with us.
Sure.
Let me start with you, Senator Xenophon. Do you support Senator Muir's move to bring on the ABCC debate and vote this week? And would there be time to do that and debate the Senate reform bill?
I haven't seen Senator Muir's actual motion, but I think it's important that the Senate deals with Senate voting reform and the ABCC. The simple way around this, and I'm not sure if the government has the appetite for this, is to actually sit longer hours, and I'm not talking about 3 or 4 in the morning, but to sit longer hours and, if need be, sit on Friday, sit early next week. The Senate has the power to do that. My view is that both are important bills, both need to be dealt with.
What's your take on it, Senator Leyonhjelm?
Yeah, well, I support Senator Muir's amendment to the time management motion of the government. I also have a time management motion for the Senate to consider the Greens same-sex marriage bill. So that will be a question for whether or not the Greens will support their own bill being considered this week. The question of the ABCC bill is whether the government wants it to be a trigger for a double dissolution or not. If it isn't considered this week, unless the Senate sits extra hours, I don't think there's any way that it can become a trigger. If it's left until budget week, the double dissolution would have to be called on the second day. The bill would have to be introduced on the first day of that week, and there wouldn't be time for it to be considered and failed to pass or failed to be considered as the Constitution requires.
I'll come back to a couple of your points in a second, but first let me bring in Senator Lambie. What's your take, Senator Lambie, on whether the Senate should discuss both the ABCC bill this week and the Senate reform prospects?
Well, considering that the ABCC is a grave threat to the power and the authority of the Australian state, and that is the words that out of the Royal Commissioner's mouth himself, I would have thought it was in our best interest to get that ABCC legislation over and done with. But there is some difficulties with that legislation, and I'm in consultation with the Law Society of Australia. They have some major issues with that. I have brought those up with Senator Cash. Senator Cash never gave me any straight answers when I seen her just over a week ago, so there is going to be some major issues with that ABCC, and while they're up there they can also bring in the registered orgs. Let's get some important issues on the table and get them dealt with before we worry about any electoral reform that they would like to bring forward.
So what do you say to the suggestion, Senator Lambie, that all these moves this week are basically about trying to get the Senate reform bill onto the back burner?
Well, you know what, I just find that's really discouraging. We've got massive problems out there in health, we've got problems out there in education, but all we're worrying about is Senate reform. But I'll tell you what it has done. It's brought instability to the country already. We already know that business phones have stopped ringing. Everybody's just gone into comatose out there. So I think Malcolm Turnbull, he really needs to come out and make some clear indications on what he wants done for the future. And this is what I'd like to see Malcolm Turnbull do. This is what I thought the new PM would have in him, would have a backbone to be able to stop this instability going on, especially our economic instability around the country. But I'm so far yet to see that out of the Prime Minister.
Senator Leyonhjelm, let me put to you what I just put to Senator Lambie. You spoke about wanting to also bring on the same-sex marriage bill. Is that all about clogging up the Senate with things other than Senate reform?
Oh no, the government and the Greens have a relationship at the moment. They can move the gag whenever they like. If they want to curtail debate at any time to get stuff through, they can do it. There are two questions though to be considered. One is the Senate voting reform. Both the government and the Greens want that, but the government also is seriously considering a double dissolution, either to get the ABCC through or purportedly to clear out the crossbench. Now, the Greens don't want a double dissolution because they might lose a couple of seats. If the ABCC bill becomes a trigger for a double dissolution, then it could be passed in a joint sitting after the double dissolution, and the Greens would lose a lot of support and be blamed for it. So there are two competing issues there.
Senator Xenophon, how do you read the politics on all of it?
It's really messy, incredibly messy, and I think the government has locked itself into a position where there's an expectation of a double dissolution election. I think the fact that Malcolm Turnbull just a few days ago said pass the ABCC and we won't have a double dissolution election seems to be a hint that they're trying to back themselves out of that. In any event, it's going to be an extraordinarily messy and ugly week in the Senate, much messier and uglier than we're used to, and I think we'll see every procedural rule in the book being used by all sides to try and get what they want. You've got your own political manoeuvres afoot in South Australia. Would you be in favour of an early election? I'm in favour, well, I'd like to get the election over and done with, but whether it's in July or September, I think that we're already in election mode, and I think Jackie is right. There is a fair degree of paralysis out there in terms of both policy and issues of confidence. If it's in July, August or September, whenever it is, I'll be as ready as I can be, but I think we need to get through this week. I think that the politics of this are very, very messy. There's a lot of confusion as to what will occur procedurally, and I'm not sure whether the government really does want a double dissolution election at this stage if they get the ABCC legislation through. Senator Lambie, what do you say to the suggestion that this has been an obstructionist Senate, that the government's justified in trying to prevent future arrays of crossbenchers?
Well, first of all, what the Australian people need to know out there is that the crossbench itself has passed 75% of the legislation. That's the first thing. And out of the $62 billion worth of savings, we've actually allowed $32 billion worth of savings to go through. And the only other $30 billion, when it comes to the other $30 billion that is still sitting there, that is because it is going to hurt those that are on or below the poverty line, people like pensioners, people who are out there struggling, and that is why that other $30 billion has not gone through. But I tell you what, they can go after their rich mates, and I'm sure they'll make up the $30 billion there, there's no doubt about that.
Senator Leyonhjelm, what is in it for the government to delay the Senate reform package? You know, you've spoken about it wanting a double dissolution trigger, but it already has two things that it could use as a double dissolution trigger if it wanted, but it's got this one opportunity to get the Senate reform bill through.
Yeah, the two triggers it already has for for a double dissolution are the abolition of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. It's said it's going to take that off the table in the deal with the Greens. The other one is the Registered Organisations Bill, which it's not really committed to. They've said they've got a better one coming, which incorporates the recommendations of the Royal Commission. If they don't get the ABCC dealt with, and so it becomes a trigger for a double dissolution, what's the point of having one other than to get rid of the crossbench? Now, if the purpose is to get rid of the crossbench and result in a more friendly, government-friendly numbers, then that's going to fail too. First of all, the crossbench won't be wiped out by a double dissolution. It would be quite possible for a number of us to win 4 or 5%. That's all we'd need in a double dissolution. The other thing is that it's never going to get control of the Senate itself, so it's actually better off dealing with a crossbench than it is dealing with the Greens and Nick, who votes for the Greens a lot. It's actually better off with a crossbench than it would be under the changes.
Just a very quick whip around before we're out of time. You all spend a lot of time with people outside of politics. If you had to plonk down a bet right now on who's going to win the election based on what you're hearing around the place, who would you be backing, Turnbull or Shorten, Senator Lambie?
I think it's going to be neck on neck. I think how it plays out over the next few months will determine on whether or not the current PM will be the next PM after the next election.
Senator Xenophon?
I'm anti-gambling. Should be asking me this. I think probably Malcolm Turnbull, but it'll be very tight. And also, David's a bit cheeky. It's a bit misleading what he said about my voting record.
Senator Leyonhjelm?
Yes, I think the government will be returned. It's very unusual for a first-term government to lose at its first election, but they'll lose seats, and they will lose more seats than they needed to because of what they're doing. They're just not doing anything.
All right, well, we'll see if you're all correct a bit later in the year. Thank you very much all for joining us.
Thank you.